Razorback fans, welcome to the weekly women's sports report from the Amigo Provisions studio. We are part of the Believe in Buzz Radio networks, where you can hear us on all podcast platforms, as well as Buzz to 106.7. So please like, rate, and review our podcast. I'm your host, Porter Hayes of the weekly women's sports report. Dorian Craft of ESPN Plus will be joining us momentarily, but we're also brought to you by Bet Online, where you can find the fastest and easiest ways to bet on all your favorite leagues. Head on over to betonline.ag to join and receive your 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit. Make sure to use our promo code BLEAV to receive your rewards. Bet online, where the game starts. And again, where I left off was we are going to be joined by Dorian Craft. She has done some ESPN Plus stuff, worked out of Little Rock before moving away and then coming back. We will be talking about her, about the softball series and just how this team's really bounced back. But I also want to talk to her about the rise of UCA softball program. I know this is primarily a Razorback-centered show, but you just can't help but notice how good that program is doing down in Conway. So I really want to talk to her about that. But speaking of the softball program and bouncing back, after the win against Alabama, and then you got to turn around after things, with the loss to UCA, the loss to Wichita State, you lose the series to Texas A&M. They were desperately in need of getting a series win to get on that track, and they did that in a big way, downing Bama and now downing number 10 Florida, and 14-1 run rule fashion yesterday to seal the victory, seal the series win, move to 5-4 in conference play. And again, like we were talking last year, when it comes to these series, you want to win the series. Yes, you look at their record in the SEC, and they're 5-4 in the SEC, but they've won 2 out of 3 series to start. So they're back, 2-1 when it comes to the series in the SEC. They have a pivotal one against Mississippi State coming up. But for them to knock off Florida, which has never lost a game inside Bogle Park, they last beat Florida, and when they played way back in the day in Ladyback Field. So this is the first time they have won at Bogle Park. And Shanice Dells, holy moly, 5-0 in the last 2 seasons against Florida. She has 13 strikeouts, only given up 2 earned runs. And I know we'll talk about Hedgecock here in a second, but you can't but help but notice that Dell's found her groove. Just got back into that SEC pitcher of the year mode, and just how Florida is a daunted offense, and to shut them down, just hold them to 1 run. That just shows you just how good her drop ball's gotten back, because you've seen in the early series is where she was struggling. She was leaving the ball up high and just letting them get those balls that would on contact go out of the field. So again, huge series. We had Reagan Johnson again, her 12th multi-hit game after going 2 for 3. Lauren Kamenson, these freshmen are starting to find their groove. That and the junior Halverson. Just this team, they're getting hits. Hannah Gamble hitting a home run when she was needing, hit 2 home runs. Christina Foreman hit her 5th home run of the season. And back to Hedgecock. She's hit 14 home runs on the season. and we're into the third series of the SEC season. So, I mean, she's starting to kind of get into that. Are we chasing the season home run record? Are we witnessing another Bogle Bomber great like, Braxton Burnside, Daniel Gibson, Lenny Malkin, all those greats that have come up. And so it's going to be nice to see where this team goes. Like Coach Deifel said after the game, pull from the same side. When somebody's having a bad game, pick them up. And I think that's huge when you've seen how they did against Wichita State, getting run ruled against Texas A&M. So huge bounce back. That shows you right there, this is a top 10 team. When you can win the way they did against top 10 talent in Alabama, which I know Alabama dropped a series this past weekend, but still, the SEC is getting deeper and deeper, just like they are in all the other sports. And you can move on and talk about the other sports and what the Razorback women's basketball team did, going to, they got beat by Kansas yesterday in the grade 8. But when you're looking at the WNIT, it's not that glamorous as the big dance. And for them to fight and not, give up, for them to be able to play at home, and then they had to travel on such short notice to, you had to play on Friday, and then you're immediately on a bus going to Lawrence. And if they would have won yesterday, they would have probably more than likely been going to Washington, where Coach Neighbors is from, to play them in the Final Four. So, they ended up going off to a bad start. I think it was like a 15-2 run or something by Kansas to open it up. And they brought it within 10. They just seemed like they were getting some points and getting some momentum going. But every time they would get within 11 to 10, Kansas would push it back. So, and in the fourth quarter, Kansas did end up indeed running away with it in the end, and they lost 78-64. They were down by as many as 21 points, but cut it to an 8-point deficit with a minute to go in the third quarter. So, much thanks to Chrissy Carr, the seniors, Chrissy Carr, Avery Hughes. Avery being a Razorback throughout her whole career, being a role player, coming off the bench and getting minimal minutes, but did not want to go to another school. That's what in-state kid, that she knows what it means to be a Razorback. So kudos to her. Best wishes to her in the her career next. And same thing with Chrissy Carr, come from Syracuse, Kansas State to Arkansas and then thank you for, choosing. That's what you get when you get these transfers. You get them for a year or two, and they're just as special by the end. I think that is, again, that's what makes Arkansas so special when it comes to the transfer portal and how they're welcomed with open arms. I don't know of a transfer portal player that hasn't been welcomed yet. So, but we're yet to see of course, we got a new year, new off season. So, see what happens. Does any of the players leave? You got Talia Scott coming in. You got Jenna Lawrence coming in. Got a girl from Spain coming in. This team, and I know it's just because covering and following and rooting for them. The roster next year is going to be huge. So, but that will do it for that part. Really anxious to see what happens with the construction of this roster for next year and Mike Neighbors. It's going to be tough because you're dealing with Kim Mulkey and LSU. You're dealing with Dawn Staley in South Carolina, Kelly Harper, Shea Ralph. It doesn't get any tougher than the SEC, and we're seeing that in all sports. You look at softball, you look at basketball, track and field. And then we ain't even talked about the addition of Oklahoma and Texas coming into the conference. That's just going to make this whole thing even tougher. So, but as of now, we will bring in Dorian Craft, ESPN play-by-play. Dorian, how are we doing?
Good, Porter. How are you?
Doing good. So you was telling me about, the pickleball stuff, and I hear a lot of people has been getting into it. Mm-hmm. I want to get into it, and it looks just like a big old Dave and Buster's version of ping pong.
Well, I think of it as a smaller version of tennis.
There you go.
I'm a tennis player. I actually played pickleball in high school before it blew up to be the version that it is now. I was my high school's pickleball champion. And so with it being the fastest growing sport in America, I decided it was time to pick it back up. I guess the average age of a professional pickleball player is still in their upper 30s. So like maybe I still have a chance to be a professional athlete somewhere down the line.
There you go. Hey, and it's picking up. I'm seeing a lot of people playing it. And I mean, it seems like a very aggressive, very competitive sport. So, but moving on, you got to call, and we're talking about the softball team and really their bounce back. I mean, you start off with the loss to Texas A&M in the series. I believe you covered that series with.
So I didn't do the Texas A&M series. I was in Ireland.
Okay.
A&M series, but I did the home opener against Arizona.
That's what it was. Okay, I knew you had done a series or had done a spot for the Razorbacks earlier in the year, but for them to bounce back the way they have, I mean, you lose to UCA, and that's another thing I wanted to talk about, moving on, because you cover them as well. The rise of that program. You lose to UCA, you lose to Texas A&M, then you get run ruled by Wichita State, and you're like, what's going on? And as media and following the program like we do, it's like you don't want to doubt the team, but you're still like, we're not used to this, coach. We're not used to this. And she said, hey, we're fine. What do? She proves everybody wrong, and they go on to beat Alabama and Florida back-to-back series.
Well, I think there are a couple things to unpack in that statement, right? So you talk about, obviously I've seen them now against Arizona. I called the Woo Pig Classic, and now again against Florida. And going back to Texas A&M series, I think Texas A&M is a lot better than people give them credit for. You take a look at what they did this weekend. They went on the road in Lexington. Texas A&M, I think, should be ranked higher than 24th. I think they will be coming into this week. They scored 24 runs against Kentucky on Saturday alone, including 5 home runs. So Texas A&M took that series in Lexington, another really difficult place to play. So I think while the series loss to A&M for Arkansas was shocking, I think A&M a little bit undervalued in how good they're going to be. So I don't think at the end of the season that's going to look nearly as bad as it did out of the gates in conference play. You also want to hit on Central Arkansas, and I heard you talking about the tail end of basketball and the strength in that league. Let's be honest, across the board, there is so much parity in this sport, and we've seen it across the board in men's and women's sport, especially with the transfer portal, that even the mid-majors are getting so much better now because they're taking some of that former Power 5 talent. Now, that doesn't apply to UCA. They've been able to keep their roster pretty much intact. But UCA is a very talented program, and especially Jordan Johnson. I know we'll get into her later when we talk about the rise of their program. But I'm not super surprised about the way that game played out either, because I had just called UCA's extra inning loss to Iowa right before that, and they played Iowa very close. And Iowa's a really good Power 5 program out of the Big Ten. So Wichita State, I don't know a ton about, and I was out of the country for that, so I'm not quite sure there. But again, coming back, going on the road, beating Alabama, your first ever series win in Tuscaloosa, and then coming back. And for me, Arkansas this weekend against Florida, the way they responded on Sunday was huge, because Florida came into the weekend best hitting team in the SEC, top 5 in the country in 4 different categories. And you come in and you work your way all the way through their pitching rotation, and you put up 14 runs and you hold Florida to just a single run on Sunday. That's a statement game and back-to-back statement series. Even though there's a lot of new faces on this Razorback team this year, I think we saw them grow up a ton over the last 2 weekends.
Yeah, and with the freshmen, you take them, what are we going to do with this big freshman class? Hey, let's go to Clearwater and play in one of the toughest, tournaments other than the one that they played out. I can't even remember the name of it, the week after, where OU and everybody played in.
Mary Nutter Classic.
Yes, that one. I mean, that's a prestigious classic as well. But what I was talking about was just you get shell-shocked. And I think that Wichita State game had everything to do with what's going on. This ain't normal. We don't have, like, even the leaders like Gamble and Dales had somebody to lean on last year. You had, and now they're the leaders. So not saying they don't know how to, it's just different. Now they're the ones that the freshmen are having to lean on them. And now we're seeing them put everything together. But what I wanted to say real quick was you went from your first series ever win against at Tuscaloosa and then you turn around and get your first ever series win against Florida here at Bogle. That just shows where this team's at.
I agree. And I think there's something to keep in perspective as well. And I said that to Brett on the broadcast yesterday. Arkansas fans have seen the last 5 years and they've gotten used to this level of success. But let's be very honest about it, right? Because when I was getting recruited, I didn't even know Arkansas had a softball program. That's how low in the SEC that they were. And I was getting recruited by Kentucky, which was also down there at the bottom at the time. You know, Arkansas spent a lot of time at the bottom of the conference. It's taken them a long time to get here. Courtney Deifel has done wonders in the 8 years since taking over the program, and the graduating class that just left, having been here for the last 4 or 5 years, really put their stamp and elevated this program to the top of the conference. But it's taken them a long time to get here. So yes, it's their first win ever against Florida in Bogle, but they haven't been competitive consistently with Florida in a really long time. It's only been the last couple of seasons.
Well, and of course that's one of them. They're in the East, so that statistic is kind of, you know, in a way, but still, yeah. I mean, I just said, you know, Shanice is 5-0 in the last 2 years against Florida. I mean, they have kind of asserted themselves as one of the top teams, if not the top team in the SEC. It's hard to argue that when you've won the last two. Right. But what I wanted to ask you is when you're building these programs, and we'll segue that into UCA, you have that foundation that you said, and it's almost like it's harder, you know, you building this program, and you've seen what happened with Lenny and Danielle and Braxton. All right, you've built that foundation. You've got to this level. Now you're like, now let's do it again with a new class. And I think that's almost harder when you get to that plateau because – one, you have that chip on your shoulder of, we're going to prove them wrong. But then that target gets bigger and that chip gets smaller. And so it's almost like you're wondering, all right, this is her first year really with a new class. How is this going to be when it comes to actually rebuilding your team? Again, 3 series in, I think she's doing a pretty daggum good job.
I would agree. And you talk about, you know, maybe a little bit of a lesser chip this year. I actually think there's still a fairly solid chip, because they were picked 3rd for the 2nd straight season. And, you know, the conversation around Arkansas the last couple of years has been, okay, you know, 2 years ago, it was co-champions, right, with Florida. And last year, yes, they did it, but they did it with all these super seniors. And now, you know, they're not going to be able to do it again because it is the turnover. So I think there's still a chip there. I think maybe next year we're talking about a slightly lesser chip. So I still think there's a fairly large one right now. But to your point about, you know, getting recruiting classes, like either way you look at it, it's hard, right? It's really hard to recruit out of the bottom of the conference. We've talked about this with football prior to Sam Pittman getting here. It's the exact same thing. Like, how do you recruit kids in that want to get beat up every single week, week in and week out? You have to get the right mix of players that really believe they can elevate the program. And Courtney Deifel did that. Now it is the larger target, and it is, we need to get now the next caliber level of player, not to say that they weren't at the same level, but now you have to keep recruiting and keep pushing that boundary, especially with Oklahoma coming in, and with Texas coming in.
I can't wait.
It's going to be the SEC. So for me, and I've said this on the broadcast, you know, it used to be that the Pac-12 was the premier conference, and I think Monica Abbott really started to change that when she was the first California player to come play at Tennessee back in the early 2000s. She kind of made that shift and put the SEC on the map, in my perspective.
Yes.
And now the SEC top to bottom is the premier conference in the country. You take a look at how many teams are ranked, Florida being the top ranked team in the SEC coming into the weekend. And so I think Coach Deifel has matched what her program has been able to do with the highest ranked recruiting class in the country. And if you keep establishing that level of success, it actually makes the recruiting easier, because now the kids want to come to you instead of you having to go out and sell them on what could be. They already see what is.
And, you know, just the whole thing, what you're talking about, Kat Osterman did the same thing at Texas, you know, exactly. Building that big, you know, it's, you know, crazy how you're talking about when you were recruited. Well, when I was in high school, they played slow pitch softball for state championships. I mean, that's just that's how far, and we're starting to see that. But again, segueing into UCA, and I want to really kind of start of how much do you think with Arkansas's, and this is not just to take anything away from UCA, so I want to get that away right quick, but how much of this with Arkansas's recruiting level on a national level and the talent in the state, how much do you think that's helped the rise of a team like UCA?
I think it raises the level of softball across the entire state. You know, we're seeing a lot more natural talent coming out of this state than we had ever before. And you mentioned the slow pitch. Arkansas was on the later end of transitioning over to fast pitch. They did it much later here. And so players have taken a little bit of longer time to develop. And you think about Hannah Gamble specifically, and I know that's at Arkansas, but her travel ball was a team out of Texas. It wasn't a team out of Arkansas. That wasn't normal up in the Northeast. I played with a team right in my home state, home city. I didn't have to go anywhere to find that level of competition. Players had to do that in the past. That's not the case anymore. So Arkansas is getting more Arkansas kids. UCA is getting more UCA kids. And when both programs have success and they can play each other and now they're competitive, not every kid is going to be able to go to Arkansas. And that's just the fact of recruiting. And it sucks to talk about that aspect, but there's only so many positions on every single team. And so a player may not be a great fit for Coach Deifel, but they've got a good relationship with UCA and Coach Parsons. Coach Deifel might pick up the phone and say, hey, Coach Parsons, she's not going to work for me. We don't have a spot for her, but maybe you do. And so that kind of camaraderie you see a lot, that elevates the status of both programs.
And I love it because, you know, with football and basketball, you're like, well, we need to get all the in-state kids because Arkansas is all we have. There's a huge drop-off between Arkansas and Arkansas State or Arkansas and UCA. But in softball, look, it's even. We called this. I mean, Coach Deifel, when they first started playing UCA, she's like, look, there's going to be a time where they beat us. Right. Coach Neighbors said the same thing with Little Rock and women's basketball. That's the thing to the casual. If you're not following UCA or Arkansas, you look at that game and you're like, how did they lose that game? Well, UCA beat LSU last year. Yep. They played them 1-0 this year. I believe they beat Georgia. And then you've played every game they've had to Arkansas. Arkansas's never run ruled them. Arkansas's always played. And I'll never forget, you've probably seen the picture of that first game at UCA and the outfield. I want that picture. If anybody can seriously get me that picture, I want to hang it up in the studio because that signified the rise of the state of Arkansas. You look at Arkansas Tech, you look at Southern Arkansas, all these schools that were mediocre are starting to benefit from what's happening between. I give UCA just as much credit as I do Arkansas because we had a girl from Ozark, Lexi McClellan. She played for UCA last year and started. So, and I think that was the team that did beat LSU. So this ain't no Johnny-come-lately team. This is a team. So what do you think also other than talk about the coach? I'm not too familiar with the coach, but what impact has she had on the program?
Well, so I've talked to Coach Parsons a little bit, and obviously she's just in her second season taking over for Coach Kewen, who was there for a really long time. And, you know, you mentioned the first game. I called that game alongside Brett Dolan on Fox Sports, and I remember how many people were there early. And I think this year's game in Conway is going to be insane. So if you guys are listening and you're planning on going, like, go now and get your spots.
Let everybody know when that is. When do they?
I believe that's going to be on April the 11th. Okay. I don't quote me on that. I'm calling so many games this year that I don't exactly remember. I know I've got Arkansas, Georgia next on the 6th. So that's my next focus. So Coach Parsons has been able to keep that roster together. And for me, that's the biggest thing, especially her pitching staff. So when I talked to her ahead of their Iowa game, I actually asked her, I was like, listen, Coach, how did you keep your two aces together? Because I'm shocked that in the days of the transfer portal, I was like, I'm surprised I didn't even try. And she goes, you know what? I heard that from all of my Division I coaches. She was like, every D1 coach that I know was joking with me going, I've just been waiting for your pitchers to get in the portal so I can go get them. And she said, I've just been blessed with Caleb Beaver and Jordan Johnson. They're really loyal. They've wanted to stay. They've wanted to be here. And for me, so I called the Florida Gulf Coast League this summer. I spent 3 weeks down in Tampa calling that league. And Jordan Johnson was playing in that league. So I got to see her extensively down there. And she was holding her own with pitchers that had played. Claire Davidson's at Duke. Excellent pitcher. Holding her own with pitchers out of the ACC, the SEC. Sarah Willis was at Washington last year. She's at UCF. And Jordan Johnson was right there on par. I think she's one of the most underrated pitchers in the country. She doesn't get a ton of run support, which is, I think, why sometimes that happens. UCA doesn't score a lot of runs, so that is an area where they struggle. But Coach Parsons being able to keep that core intact, that pitching core, and then across the board, these girls have played together for so long. They've had such a consistent lineup. I think that's really what you're seeing right now, and it's paying dividends that they're so comfortable playing together.
Well, and you get you a couple lockdown pitchers, and that you look at Storms and Half and Dels, but you also look at like you said with UCA, but you look at Cat Osterman, you look at an Abbott, you look at a Jenny Finch, you look at all the greats that could hold people to 2-1 runs, maybe 3. That really takes a lot off of your plate when it comes to the pressure on the offense. So you can see it, and especially let's not sugarcoat it a little bit. Was UCA is not playing in the SEC, so you don't need to. If you get a couple of lockdown pitchers, and honestly, switching it back to Arkansas, that's one of the concerns for me is, every year you look at Storms and then Half and now Dels, they've really kind of had to ride on that one pitcher. And then when it comes time for super regional, you look at the 172 pitches that Shanice threw, that's where we really want to make sure Heron and Kamenzen, Turner, Gaffin, these girls, because you're going to need another 2 of those starters to really step it up if you're going to get to Oklahoma City.
Well, and I think, talking about Arkansas's rotation, I've been very impressed with Robin Heron with what I've seen so far. But Coach Deifel was pretty frank when we talked to her earlier this year. She said, she's not going to be able to take pitches off at this level. And even good pitches, they're going to get hit hard. And I think we saw that a little bit in game 2. She made a couple of mistakes in the center of the plate, elevated the 2 home runs to Longley and Eccles. Those got hit out of the park. But we saw the quality of the hitter. Shanice Dels, the home run that Skylar Wallace hit on Sunday. That was a good pitch. That pitch was up and out, and it was a rise ball, and Wallace was still able to hit it out of the park. UCA and Central Arkansas. There's so many Arkansas in the title. But Arkansas is going to need to find a way to score runs. If I was looking at their statistics across the board, the one thing that would concern me a little bit is their batting average. They're the lowest in the SEC coming into the weekend. I haven't taken a look at the stats as of this morning, but I know Coach Deifel was really hammering the walks. If you can work walks, which I think Arkansas did a really good job of that both on Friday and on Sunday, if you can work walks and find yourself ways to get extra runners on base and give yourself more scoring opportunities, runners on base, RBI chances, that's where you're going to see those runs and stuff start to go up. And I think if Arkansas can control the strike zone, that, to your point, takes a little bit of pressure off of the pitchers, especially on that Saturday game, where the Saturdays in the super regionals and in the series right now are kind of pitched by committee until Heron can go the full distance against an SEC lineup.
Yeah, and, she didn't give up any walks. Shanice didn't give up any walks against Florida, which is huge.
Right.
I kind of want to spice it up, and I've asked this question to a couple of people. Do you think it's time to move the fence back? Do you think with I know for the entertainment – and the home runs, I totally understand it makes everything exciting. But to me, when you get a pitch that's down in the zone and you're reaching for it almost like a slap and it's going out, and I've played softball. I know how hot those Easton Ghosts are.
Yeah, I didn't get to play with the Ghosts. I wish I would have.
Those things are stupid hot. And plus, with just how much technology, do you think maybe it's time to scoot those fences back a little bit, or do you think it'd be a big disadvantage?
I mean, so I think, and I'm going to sound like I'm no fun. I think the home run numbers are a little inflated based on looking at it from my perspective and knowing that when I played, if and I said this again yesterday on the broadcast, if your number 4 hitter had 10 home runs, like that was a great season. You just didn't see the numbers that you see now. And I think, I see it more in high school than I do at the collegiate level, but I've seen girls take really bad swings and the ball goes over the fence. And I'm like, that's not a technically sound swing, and you shouldn't be rewarded for that. And again, I know I sound so mean, but in terms of improving yourself, I think if we're going to keep the technology where it is and keep advancing it so it favors the offensive game, I think, yes, eventually we are going to need to be pushing those fences back, because you take a look at the home runs, right? I mean, I've seen Danielle Gibson. I saw her put one onto the street. And not saying that with the advancements in strength and conditioning and nutrition and all the things that are available to players now that we didn't have, I'm not saying that that's not possible, but when you're seeing that kind of power production, I think you can stand to move the fences back a little bit because the home runs are still going to be able to be hit.
Yeah, if you're hit them into the street, and then I think it was either Braxton or Lenny that hit one that started rolling down the street. It rolled down the street in between Bud Walton and the practice facility.
Yeah.
Danielle hit one out of either Tennessee or Florida that went out of the stadium and rolled next door to the track and field facility. But if you're hitting balls that far, and look, I was at a batting practice and they were hitting them one hopping to the black fence.
Right.
And it's like I said, I just think in a sense that it's time to kind of move it back because you're looking at 200, 210 down the line, 220. It's a little league field.
It does kind of have that feel to it sometimes. I think if I had to guess, so obviously Bogle is 200 down the lines, 220 straight away. If you're hitting it onto the street, that is probably at a minimum, I'm going to say 260 to 280.
Mm-hmm.
If I had to guess. And I think the longest ball that I ever hit in my career was about 240, and I did it once. So again, to kind of put that in perspective, the 15-year difference in the differential between the technology, if you are consistently putting those balls out at 250, 260, you're going to put it out even if you move the fence back to 230.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And that's definitely, I've been thinking about that for a couple of years because you're watching and of course watching the Bogle Bombers be blooming into what they are every single year. You're seeing 2 to 3. You look at Hedgecock's at 14 right now.
Georgia's already hit 55 home runs.
Jeez,
like, that's insane. It's not, the funny thing is when I got back into calling back in 2021, when I was calling with Meg Turk, she played at Baylor and we're about the same age. And I looked at her, I was like, were we just that bad or are the bats that good? And she's like, no, they're that good. Like, don't feel bad. Don't feel bad about yourself.
If you go to Walmart and get you one of those Easton bats, and that's what we played with back then and slow pitch and stuff. And now you look at the Easton Ghost that you get and they're $300-400 bats, but it's just, it's insane. But
I paid $400 for that kind of, I paid $400 for street power. So I played with a first generation Rocket Tech. And if anyone out there knows what that is, like they actually took those away from us because they said then they were too dangerous back in 2000. That would have been, I graduated in 05. So they started phasing those out back in 06. And I'd be really interested now to go back. If anyone still has one, like, let me know.
Yeah.
Because I lost mine somewhere. I'm so mad about it, but I would be really interested to know from a swing perspective to test what the original Rocket Tech was versus what the Ghost is now. And just kind of see a comparison. Cause I would venture a guess to say that the Ghost is even more loaded than that was.
Yeah, and you're dealing with a composite bat. It's a different kind of sting. And yes, I know colder weather, but when you're dealing with D1, they just replace them. You're having these deals with Easton and stuff like that. But anyway, so I was going to ask you also. So you're calling games, kind of moved away. Now you're back. How much fun has it been being able to call these games and being a softball player and getting into the news, but now you're getting to call the games. Now you've come back, done some stuff with Sydney, especially in the high school ranks. How much fun has it been coming back and, what are you looking forward to in the future of Razorback softball?
It's been so fun for me. This is why I came back to Arkansas, to have this opportunity to advance my career as a play-by-play and an analyst. I've been so blessed that, both Central Arkansas and the Razorback Sports Network have allowed me this opportunity. And so hopefully I continue to grow in that, but it's been really great to see, both the advancement of the program and then the advancement of women in the booth. I think there's a real desire, and softball's always kind of been a little bit more forgiving because it is a female and a woman's sport. So you've been able to have those voices, but just the advancement across the board and the opportunities that they are for us. And I know you and I have talked about that in prior years, but to see that has been really gratifying for me, and to have people be so open to those experiences. And the Razorback fans have really, I feel like, embraced me. They've been really excited to hear that I'm back. So that's always encouraging. And, to hear the coaches tell both Sydney and I, and we got this feedback after the Woo Pig Classic, how much they enjoyed hearing our call, because they could tell how much we enjoyed it and how knowledgeable we were. to me, when a coach says they enjoyed listening, like that is the biggest compliment that you can get, because they're going to know if you say something wrong. Like they're going to call you out if you mess up something.
Yeah.
And so to get that kind of feedback is the most gratifying. And so I've been very excited to be back. I think they're a fun team to watch, and I'm just so excited to see, what comes next.
And you don't have a big drop off. You again, if you're not calling for the Razorbacks, you get to call UCA. So I mean, it's just been really exciting to, see you come back. When we talked, I think the advancement since the last time we talked till now, having you and Sydney, I mean, two people who are very passionate about softball. And that's, again, it's kind of like y'all's lingo and something that y'all can relate to. And it's really good. And Brett does an amazing job calling games for the Razorbacks and on ESPN Plus and the SEC network. But it's just when you get somebody who is passionate about the sport, who's played the sport, you just get a different spice to it. So I really appreciate that you're back. I was really excited when you said you'd return to Arkansas. So to hopefully running into you at a Bogle Park.
I hope so. And I got to say, it was funny when Sydney and I were in the booth, how many times we were literally going to say the same thing at the same time. It was like kind of being the same person. But I'm really excited. And I've got a nice variety of softball this year, because I'm doing obviously UCA, Arkansas. I'll go up and do Missouri State here in a couple of weeks. And then I got a game or two at UK as well. So I'm kind of all over the place and kind of trying to spread the love this year.
Well, good luck to you. Again, it's always a pleasure to have you on. We'll definitely have to chop it up again, maybe get you and Sydney on at the same time, and we'll just bounce some stories. Really with this women's show that I started a couple months back, it's been really awesome to have women announcers on, women players, coaches, and that's what we dedicated this show to. So again, I really appreciate you coming on and looking forward to seeing you in the future.
Always good, Porter. Appreciate you. Thank you.
Have a good evening. Well, that was Dorian Craft of ESPN Plus, does an amazing job of covering UCA softball and Arkansas softball. You can catch her all over the ESPN network. Just look for her, follow her on Twitter, see what game she's at, and we will catch you. We'll catch you on Sunday, and we'll be back then.